What up, Pittsburgh?
How's it going in Arkansas today, Dave?
It's a pretty day. It feels vaguely spring-like even.
I'm raring to go here. I was listening to some Violent Femmes to get pumped up for the show. I had a good PB&J for lunch. I'm ready to just get right into it. So if you've got an intro question, hit me with an intro question.
I do. All right, so if you had to boil Gen X down to one movie, what would it be?
Super easy. High Fidelity.
Oh, nice. Okay. All right. Well, my answer, I was a little worried that we might have the same answer, but I'm glad we didn't. Mine is Heathers.
Okay. All right. That is a dark vision of our generation, Dave. but a very funny one. So we'll get into that. But first, it is my assignment to welcome people to Stupid Gen X Tricks once again, the show for people who used to be cool. And today we're doing episode 5. It's our 5th episode, Dave, and we're calling it "What the Heck Is Gen X Anyway?" So thank you, folks, for listening.
We probably should have done this episode first, but I'm glad we've had a little time to get our sea legs. And yeah, so we're going to be talking about the things that influenced our generation, what they meant to us then, and what they mean now. But we've never really identified this culture specifically.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, there's a bunch of questions that we've been asking each other since we started doing this, since we started talking about the idea of doing this, that we don't really have great answers to. They're all works in progress. They're all going to continue to be questions, I'm guessing, for as long as we keep doing this. But we have the advantage today of being able to bring in a couple of really smart book writing kind of people who are, in fact, doing some book writing about all of these questions that we're asking. And so we're going to see what they have to say and help move the whole thing along and share that with our audience in like a breaking down the fourth wall kind of way. We're letting them into the process. But tell me about why Heathers is your paradigmatic Gen X motion picture.
Okay, so obviously there are a number of films that could be considered, and that's certainly not everyone's first choice, as evidenced by your answer. But for me, as a kid watching movies where there were characters who were young, it was just grating to see how we were portrayed. Like they were so clearly written by adults. You had kids who were too young using lines that were too old. You had older kids who sounded too stupid for their age. They never got it right. And then beginning with the John Hughes movies, I'm sure there were some pre-John Hughes movies that had exceptions. And even a film like Ordinary People, I think, was very intelligent about teenagers. Yeah. I don't remember Kramer versus Kramer as well as I remember Ordinary People. But, it wasn't like John Hughes was the first to get us right, but it felt like on an ongoing basis he did. But it did seem, and perhaps I was a little influenced by a conversation I had this week with my friend Susan Bernstein, who actually went to the high school where that was shot, and she was an extra,
You're just dropping names for the algorithm, aren't you?
Oh, yes. Susan should get us to 1 million. Absolutely. She's a great photographer. And yeah, so she'd been to the school and she was like, well, let me tell you, they didn't all look like that at our school, and Brandon, I think, mentioned this. I forget the name of the school where, at least Pretty in Pink was shot, but I think maybe they shot, Ferris Bueller and even, and Breakfast Club there, but it's a suburban Chicago school.
Okay.
So, and when
is it New Trier? I feel like it's probably New Trier.
That doesn't sound familiar. Okay. And if I said something, I'm sure it would be wrong, but we can check that and put it in the show notes or something. Is that what show notes are for?
I guess so. I always hear podcasters talking about putting stuff in the show notes, and I will admit that I've never looked at the show notes, so yes. I don't know.
We'll fix it in post either way. So with Heathers, it was dark. It was very dark. It was much darker than anyone I knew, of course.
Yes, pretty much everyone kills themselves.
Yes. So, but I think they did get a sense of the cruelty in high school in a way that was realistic. Also, I was reading an interesting article about it, and they used a term that I really liked that I'm now totally blanking on. I think cafeteria tribalism, that was it. And that's really real. And of course, I loved Winona Ryder, Christian Slater. He was great. He was like a cool, kind of,
Right.
he was clearly playing Jack Nicholson as a teenager. But I mean, everyone loves Jack Nicholson. So it was just a lot of fun. And it was also nice to see the popular mean kids get handled a little bit, which in a way that was pretty dramatic. So
yeah, there was definitely a like geek's revenge fantasy element to it that was very resonant for both of us, it sounds like.
yes, exactly. Good. Well, so talk about High Fidelity, a great film.
Yeah, High Fidelity, and I'm realizing as I'm talking that actually my love was more, at least originally, for the book than the movie, because I had read the novel, and I was probably in my early mid-20s when it came out. And I just remember it was really the first thing I read that was like, I feel like I know this guy. I feel like I a little bit am this guy, or would like to, and the whole idea of, identifying yourself through the things that you love and care about, is probably not a restrictively Gen X idea, but it does seem to be one that defines a lot of our generation. And I think that the idea too of like then wrestling with how do you grow up and move on from that a little bit, and like, to bring it back to the topic that seems to come up here almost every program, can you love someone really who loves Billy Joel? And, I just feel like that book and that film do such a great job of capturing that feeling and that emotion. And, all of the top 10 lists are just great. And then in the movie, you get Jack Black being just awesomely Jack Black. And, yeah, can't really say enough good things about it. There's the great Springsteen cameo that will live forever. It's we both picked Chicago movies. So there you go. Even though the book is London, the movie, they moved it here.
Yes, you recall the film with far more detail than I do, but I loved John Cusack in there, and then he had a sidekick, right, who was...
Yeah, I can't remember who the actor is, who's the third guy in the record store group. But yeah, he was also really, really good.
Yeah, and there's a whole Smiths dialogue, isn't there, in the film version?
I think so. The guy who we're struggling to remember was definitely like a Smiths fan kind of guy. He was a very emo, cardigan sweater wearing type of music fan, and probably talks about the Smiths at some point. I can't quite remember that.
So, is it time to bring in our special guests?
Yeah. We are going to come in and talk about this whole idea of how do you define a generation? And is that something that's worth doing? I've been a little bit skeptical about that throughout the process of putting this show together, but let's dig into it and see what they have to say. And of course, the reminder always to our viewers and listeners that if you're enjoying it, if you're just putting up with us long enough to get to our cool guests, please do all the things that we ask you to do: share and like and subscribe and follow our social media content, and
which we need
say
to
nice things to us if you see us say nice things to us if you see us in the street. And let's go to break and come right back. The skywriting is always encouraged. Yeah.
I feel like we need to mention that every episode because maybe, dreams can come true.
Or can we do semaphore advertising? Is that a thing? Do people do that?
I don't even know what that is.
That's the thing with the flags where the different flags in different positions stand for different letters. It's like a old sailor thing. I figured you went to boarding school. You should know about sailing, Dave.
No, I got kicked out of sailing camp, though. Maybe we can tell that story later. A camp that I did not request attendance for, I will say. So I don't have sailing in my bones.
All right, let's go to break. Okay, so we have brought on our guests, and they are here to elucidate us. But first, we can actually introduce them properly. Melissa Lenos and Kevin Ferguson are the authors of the upcoming book, Generation X, the popular culture that defined the MTV generation. Kevin Ferguson is Associate Professor of English at Queens College, City University of New York, the alma mater of George Costanza, if I'm not mistaken. And Melissa is Senior Director of Graduate Advising and Engagement for the Humanities at the University of Pittsburgh here in southwestern Pennsylvania. So we are delighted to have you both here. And you've described the book, or someone else described the book to me when they introduced you, as an encyclopedia of Gen X culture. So what brings people to doing something like this, and are we really worth studying?
Are we? That is a great question. I don't know. And now I'm starting to also what brought me to do this and to spend all this time on it. It is an encyclopedia. Our audience we're imagining are, interestingly enough, high school students, young college students, people of a different generation who might have Gen X parents, or we talk a lot about Gen X erasure, might even not be aware that there was a generation here, and just think of the boomers versus the millennials. And so one thing that we talked a lot about in writing it was trying to rethink about our own childhood, our own experiences, and reframe that in our current moment for people who might be getting some, bits and pieces of this history kind of passed down, wearing the Nirvana T-shirt that they bought, at the Target, but not really understanding what it would have meant to hear it, or pulling up the Spotify and hitting the remix on the Pixies track or whatever, and be like, here's how we used to do things.
Nice. That's great. They've got to learn all of this stuff. It's critically important. So how do you go about defining Gen X culture? There's a set of years, of course, but you're covering a lot of territory in the book. How do you pick your topics? And do you look for culturally influential, popular, or critically acclaimed, or just your own instincts?
Yeah, we cover that. We spend a lot of time in the introduction talking about how this is a very personal book, right? And one of the ways that we frame that is through things like race, class, and gender. Like these are the things that were important to us in our personal experiences as Gen Xers growing up, and also these are the things that are interesting to us in this moment. So because we cover both elements of popular culture from our coming of age, but also reflecting back now. So Gen X creators now, and then also I got really particularly interested in what I refer to as like Gen X nostalgia porn, like Stranger Things. So like, what does that mean? What is a text like that is created by people who are not Gen X? But it's like, here are some millennial visions of what our childhood was like, and here is how it is both interestingly accurate and way, way, way off base. So.
It's so funny you mentioned Stranger Things. I haven't really watched much of it. Everyone loves it, I gather, but wasn't exactly what I was in the mood for. But I saw an interview with the creators where they were talking about headgear and how headgear was hilarious. And I remember
like the nighttime brace thing.
Yes, yeah. And like there was, I guess there's a character with headgear, and it's got to be unfortunate. And I remember there was this like beautiful girl in my 6th grade, and she had headgear, and I always thought, oh, that poor thing, she'd be so pretty with all that stuff all over her. And she, of course, she was like super self-conscious because it looked ridiculous. That's some technological advancement to get rid of headgear for sure, but.
It is. I mean, headgear is inherently hilarious. So I don't disagree.
I'm trying to think. There's at least one of the John Hughes, right? Farmer Ted wears headgear in 16 Candles, but I feel like it comes up in other ones too.
That's critical. Well,
that's interesting that you said that. And I had started answering my question with an example of technology that seems dated today, right? These things called CDs, and you had headgear and even like potential things. I think in a show like Stranger Things, these are used as pretty easy markers of like what decade you're in, what period you're in, and it's a kind of shorthand. And it's interesting they're technological because one thing that again we struggle with the introduction and thinking about what Generation X is is that those dates, like if you're born in 1965 and 1981, you're automatically counted. There's lots of people that wouldn't have identified necessarily with certain aspects. So there's not a homogenous, monolithic culture that everyone suddenly that was born in that period kind of represented or expressed. And so when we were picking our topics, I did find us kind of veering back and forth between wanting to think like, what does a Chicano Gen X look like? Is there a Black Gen X? Is it the same? How what are kids who are listening to Nirvana and Dr. Dre at the same time? How does that kind of clash against that shorthand stereotyped image of the grunge flannel or whatever it might be?
It definitely was. It seems like a period in which you started to have that breakout of hip hop culture into the world of like suburban white kids. We think of it as a very racially divided time, and we've talked on the podcast before that in sort of both of our experiences in the places where we grew up, there was a lot of that divide. But at the same time, it was the area, where, you hate to say it, but Cosby was the biggest show on television, right? And Prince and Michael Jackson were huge stars with massive crossover appeal. Eddie Murphy was a huge... So there was definitely, in the realm of culture at least, some breaking down of walls.
Mm-hmm. One of the last entries that I wrote was actually about Mariah Carey. I wasn't super excited about digging into that. That was one that our editor, we finished and then immediately got an email from our editor saying, like, we need more entries.
You forgot this and that. What about this person?
You didn't, really just like their list of things that they wanted covered. And so we chose some off of that list and went back in. And one of them was Mariah Carey, who's not an artist, one of those artists who I'm like, this is an enormously important popular musician, not one that I am particularly interested in. But then when I started digging into her history and her career, and her framing of her history as breaking down barriers for artists of mixed race backgrounds, which is crazy to think of now, that it was not something that was addressed openly in the music industry. She insisted upon a massive amount of creative control for a young woman of that time. And part of the reason was she felt that she was getting all of this flack about not being a white artist or a Black artist because she wanted to be something else. And so
how was she able to get that control?
By having like breakout albums we were joking earlier about how like the point of writing the book is so that you can immediately empty your brain of all information. And she was married to is it Mottola, producer
Tommy Mottola?
Yes. And so which by the way she was very young, and so it seemed that relationship seemed super predatory and problematic. But getting kind of like in and producing hit albums and then divorcing him and leaving the label like kind of at the same time and writing her own ticket at the new label that she went to. I can't remember off the top of my head where she jumped to. Yeah, so demanding creative control, but also refusing to kind of like take that bait of like you have to fit into one of these two categories and they are racially divided, right, and we're going to market you one way or the other. And she's like, no, that's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is like creating a crossover category that is partly inspired by my experience of being in the world as a woman with a mixed race background. And that is, I read all of these like wonderful articles about that is one of the reasons that she became this queer icon, because queer kids in the 80s and the 90s seeing her as this figure that wasn't fitting in, and that a lot of her albums, like a lot of her albums are about, and they have titles that foreground that idea of like I don't feel like I fit anywhere, but I have this passion and this experience that I want to share with the world. Yeah. So now I'm like a Mariah Carey fan.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I have to say I would have summed her up the same way it sounds like you did previously, of like big pop star who I didn't really care about, but it sounds like there's a lot more there. I
had to interview her once. It was not pleasant.
Oh, did you?
Oh, no, really?
Well, now you got to tell the story.
This was in the early days of portable digital video cameras, and so I was working at MTV, but I was not trained in television the way a number of my peers were. I'd had some experience, but I'd never been a shooter. And they sent me over by myself to interview her at the Tower Records in Lincoln Square. She was promoting something. I feel it's this seems a little too convenient, but I think it might have been the original release of the Christmas album, because I remember thinking that it was such lightweight stuff. And I'd come from working in politics where, the weight of the world was on the decisions and things. And I was like, and now I'm interviewing Mariah Carey. And then she was not pleasant. She wanted, first of all, she spotted me with this camera and figured out very quickly that I was not much good at it, and so she knew she had to stage manage the cameraman basically for the interview, and I wanted to shoot it in a certain way, and she kept moving me to only shoot the right side of her face. It was all about shooting the right side of her face, which ties right into the control thing you talked about. So, and then I don't remember how the interview went, but I don't remember it being especially great, and it was probably my fault.
Oh.
Anyway,
and that Christmas album never sold anything as a result. So
she owes it all to me. It was really nice working with her. Yeah.
So a question that we've kind of wrestled with as we've gone into doing this podcast, this is now our fifth episode. We've been working on it for a couple months, right? Is there something that you can point to or say really does define, this agglomeration of people born between 1965 and 1981? Is there such a thing as a Gen X personality? Is there such a thing as Gen X art? What sets us apart from the boomers and the millennials? I think there's things that we all sort of instinctively feel, but also a lot of we're not all the same.
I have an answer, but do you?
I want to think mine through, so go ahead.
This is something we have certainly talked about. It's what I alluded to earlier about this idea of the generation not being a monolithic thing. Even you think of your stereotypical yuppie. Well, they're all boomers and dressed the same way or had the same fortune, et cetera, et cetera. So in thinking about what might bring Gen X together, and I don't think it's going to be totalizing, but the thread that kept recurring in all the examples I was thinking of, music, film, fiction, etc., was this play between authenticity and apathy. That a core feature, a theme, a subtext of let's say fiction and art at the time seems to deal with wanting to be genuine and authentic, and usually expresses a rejection of selling out, right? All these movies sold out and I don't support them anymore. No, they were signed to the major labels, or now they're playing there, so that idea of authenticity, realness, that kind of thing, and how that connects in a way with another theme of apathy and disaffection and boredom and dropout.
We were the slackers.
We're the slackers. Boomers have all the jobs. Why bust my ass at a McJob? I'm just going to go, kind of get by, and I've got my community of friends. And so, wanting to work really hard and make it and be successful. But then if you go too far, you sell out. And then so the flip side of that, this kind of thing about apathy. I kept seeing that kind of theme, again, throughout a range of kind of examples of art.
I was thinking that the Kurt Cobain Rolling Stone cover where he's wearing the white t-shirt.
Yeah.
I think it says corporate magazines still suck. I was trying to pull it up. That to me, I was trying to condense that into a concept, which is basically the fixation with authenticity.
Right.
I hate to steal your answer, but that is exactly where I was heading with it as well. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
And in the realm of culture, it's a fixation on often invented authenticity, right? He had to go out and buy that shirt and walk into wherever that photo shoot was happening with executives from Rolling Stone there and say, here's what I'm going to be wearing. And they had to admit, I don't doubt that was something that he felt very deeply. And certainly it's reflected in his music and it's reflected in what we know of his life. But it's always the appearance of authenticity more than the thing itself in some ways, right? Because
the
thing itself is just and a slacker. So, I'm perfectly placed.
And it was just like it felt like there was such an anxiety driving it as well. I mean, for me, because the music is where that concept lives most viscerally in my mind. These bands that, like, the longing to be successful crashing up against the terror of the accusation of selling out, right?
Yeah. And it's real. I mean, so I was telling my teenage son recently, he's a big music fan, and he was telling me excitedly about some band that he likes or rapper that he likes getting a big endorsement deal, for whatever sneaker brand or whatever. And he just thought that was really cool and exciting. And it like bumped against my sensibilities. And I told him the story of the Long Riders, which I'm guessing you guys remember. Maybe not, because I think you're a little younger than me. But they were a band who in the late 80s were a big college radio act. They were like an early kind of roots alternative rock kind of band. I really liked them. They had a lot of buzz. They had a lot of street cred. They were starting to get there. And they did a Miller Beer commercial. Not just licensed their music, but actually like appeared in the ad, and the narration was about them, and their career ended because, people like me, like as a college radio DJ, was like, screw them, I'm not putting that on the air anymore. And there were lots of us. And I read recently, after I had this conversation, looked up and read a little bit about it, and they said, yeah, that just killed us. People lost all interest in anything we had to do. And I explained this to my 17-year-old, and it was like I was, speaking German. Like he just didn't get it. I was a little bit hard pressed to explain why it was so wrong for these people to want to be able to make a living doing the thing that they love doing and get some recognition for it. And
well, it's probably, I mean, what we were doing in that era was probably an outgrowth of the anti-establishment feelings of the 60s and certainly the 60s and into the 70s, and then it kind of morphed into culture with us. And David, I think, talked about this anti-corporatism, and I have this memory of, it wasn't an act I liked, it was more like my local radio station was talking about how Phil Collins, hardly a leader of the indie movement,
we keep coming back to our hatred of Phil Collins.
I know. I keep hitting up Phil Collins. And he had a tour that was going to be sponsored by Pepsi, and there was outrage over it. And I kept thinking, he's a sellout. Like, he always was a sellout. Who cares? Which I'm sure Phil Collins would take issue with, but that was the first I ever heard of that kind of like, hey, musician, don't sell out.
Yeah.
We've got the Pearl Jam versus Ticketmaster. We've got the Seattle protest with the World Trade Organization. We got Starbucks expanding. So I think, corporate culture, corporatism, I see those as kind of becoming, alongside this anti-establishment kind of remnants, also just becoming a little bit more pressing. And I can't say that I was very politically like savvy or aware at the time of these things, but you could just tell, like, these guys are bad. Like this corporate, the fact that it's a corporation, that it's whatever, this doesn't sit right. Mm-hmm. And so having that, attached is no good.
David, I think I yelled at you a little bit about this when we met up before. Like that from my perspective, and this might be super.
To be fair, if you were yelling, it was very loud.
Love yelling about Gen X. My sense of Gen X as unusually apolitical teenagers as a group. And I don't know if that was, again, like specific to my kind of like Midwest working class background. Like I just felt totally uninterested in anything having to do with like boring adults talking about politics. And I was trying to kind of thread this when we were writing into that angst about like Gen X being the generation that didn't get a president, Like,
right. Well, it's funny because you're talking to, so the two of us were probably in the like upper 1 percentile of politically attuned teenagers in our time. I mean, I think my favorite TV show when I was in high school was Washington Week in Review, and which, I got a lot of dates because of that. And you talk in the chapter guide that we were able to take a look at, you mentioned the 92 campaign as a presidential campaign as a Gen X talisman, which is something that the two of us were a part of, and so would love to hear what your thinking on that is.
You wrote that one.
Oh.
Go.
I was thinking of the Rock the Vote, like as an example of a proof or piece of evidence of that kind of apoliticalness of most, that there was this, we have to do this thing called Rock the Vote, and we've got to get, big musicians to come, and the kind of flip side of the selling out kind of thing is like, okay, these guys are cool, and voting can be cool, and they can be endorsed, and REM's going to include voter registration, cards, and I forget what, there was a document or so, whatever album it was, maybe it was Green.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so weird.
Rocking the vote now.
I don't remember that, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, they were big behind that. The sense that the Democrats needed young voters, and so also trying to make Clinton, get him on the saxophone on Arsenio, make him seem cool, and like
that was a big moment.
It's wild to think about it. Now the norms have shifted so much, but like he's got the sunglasses. It's like, that's shocking. We've never seen a president. I think he was the first on like a late night show like that.
Oh,
yeah.
To certainly to play an instrument and to do these things.
Is he a good saxophone player? I don't even know.
I don't play saxophone.
He actually is. Yeah, I mean, he's not like, you wouldn't pay money to go see him if he wasn't also president of the United States. But
for yourself.
for like, middle-aged dad sax player, yeah, he's pretty good.
If you want to geek out on that topic, there's a David Moranis biography of Clinton that's really interesting, and it gets into part of his reason for playing sax, which I always, no offense to my co-host, but like band kids were kind of nerdy, and I always thought like Clinton was like a big man on campus.
I was an orchestra kid, just to be clear.
Okay.
More refined.
By the way, my best friends were band kids, so I'm including myself. But I always wondered like why Clinton played the sax if he was a cool kid, and it's because he's from Hot Springs, Arkansas, which is a big entertainment town, and turns out the only way you could get into a bar as a teenager in Hot Springs is if you were a musician in the band.
Oh, cool.
And so he could go, there might have been some young ladies that he had in his sights that were in some of those bars. And so I'm sure there's more to it, but I suspect that's a big part of it. But anyway, yeah, that's a great one. And I worked on the Choose or Lose and Rock the Vote stuff for MTV later, so if you guys want to get a little more granularity on that, I'm happy to fill you in on a few things. It's also, the other thing about Rock the Vote as a separate entity that partnered with MTV was that was really driven by Tipper Gore and the V-chip stuff, where the record industry was worried about getting
the labeling,
which then ended up driving the popularity of the bands that the industry was afraid would hurt them.
Literally might have been the only reason I bought a 2 Live Crew CD.
It looks cool. It's got the right there.
It's dangerous. It's dangerous.
This is edgy.
Free Skeech Warrior D. Snyder.
Yes.
That's great. And now there's some there's things like John Hughes and Mixtapes that you guys cover, and some of those seem very distant now. Do you think they resonate more now because of that, or is there a nostalgia factor that people are responding to now from that?
Those are John Hughes and Mixtapes. I have completely different answers. With Mixtapes, I think for me and I have two kids. I have a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. So some of it's just, let me explain how we got here. Like there was a time when this happened, and then this could do. How do we, share music and things like that? The closest I have with my teen is a shared Spotify playlist. I forget what they call it, but your Spotify accounts, you link them, and then it gives you every day a playlist of your things. And it's awful. Right. It's like all over the place, and we're finally kind of getting in sync. And so we listen to it together, and that I think captures some of the spirit of what was fun about a mixtape, but it also loses everything that was special about getting it synced up perfectly, imagining the girl you're going to give it to, or the birthday present that it was going to be for your buddy, and how you're going to write out, with the marker, all of the titles and everything.
It was curation.
It was curation, absolutely.
And it was obsessive. I mean, there is no measure for the hours that I spent carefully planning mixtapes for friends.
So many minutes on this side, you're gonna have to. Yeah.
And I wasn't an artistic kiddo, and so the agony of getting a beautiful mixtape from somebody with a gorgeous case, and I'm just I'm writing Pixies in my shitty Sharpie. There's a book. It's a Thurston Moore edited collection of musicians talking about mixtapes, and it is one of the most beautifully nostalgic pieces of art I've ever read. Just the enthusiasm for that experience of giving and receiving, and that I can't remember which artist it was who summed it up as there's this you're crossing this line of, I think that you are so cool, and I need you to know how cool I am. And I'm giving you this artifact that somehow expresses both of these things.
There's pressure in a mixtape.
Yes.
Fair amount of pressure,
well,
certainly.
There's the pressure on both sides, right? There is I gave you my Tears for Fears mix and you didn't like it, so sorry. But when you invest that much in the things that you love, which we were talking about before you guys joined us, seems like one of the defining traits for a lot of people in our generation. Things just take on a lot of weight.
I was going to say a scarcity in a sense as well compared to today's streaming age. This track got dropped this morning. I could have listened to it 20 times already. I didn't have a lot of money, so buying a tape, buying a CD was and there's a wall of them. And how are you going to know and pick and the cover art? And so, a mixtape, which has these things, and it'll usually be older artists or British things, I would get that I hadn't heard of. That kind of, I don't know, I always, even if I didn't care for the songs necessarily, I was this is something I would have never heard elsewhere. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be on the radio. I wasn't tuned into the college, radios or things like that. What were you going to say?
I was going to say that I received a mixtape once from a boy who liked me, and it was all metal, which was not a genre that I was very into at the time. However, my name being Melissa, he wrote my name in the Metallica font with the M and the A, and I was like, "This is fantastic!" You get one date at least for this.
I thought you were going to say. So my wife's name is Melissa, and she basically everyone she ever dated would either make a tape of or sing Sweet Melissa to her. And,
that is why I am named that, and I assume that is why there were 4 Melissas in my grade. That one had legs in terms of its naming impact for Gen X girls. We also, there was a thread on whatever new Twitter, Blue Sky the other day. We have a friend who is specifically a scholar of popular music, and she was talking about the hidden track on CDs.
Oh, yeah.
And again, the idea of explaining this to someone now, but they were saying that
she was talking not about the hidden track, the pre-gap track. So you get to the end of the CD, and then you wait, 15 minutes or whatever, and this little song comes on. Mind blown is the first I learned it. Apparently, you put in the CD, you hit back, you go back, and you reverse, and there's another space before the album even begins for music to be recorded. Right? There's a whole Wikipedia page, and it's CDs I had. I can't remember now. Well, I have to share this with you so you can see.
Pre-gap track. Wow.
The pre-gap track, Wikipedia has an impartial list.
I think my CD player was shitty because I don't think I could have reversed off of the first track. I don't think mine had the capability. I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, you probably had to have special equipment of some sort to do that.
So as you were talking about the mixtapes, I was fighting the urge to turn off the camera and dive 4 feet away into my box of mixtapes from when I was a teenager. They're all sitting there.
You still have them?
I have all of them, and they have. I've got all the art, and I was like a kind of a graphic designy kind of and then I did mixed CDs. I've got all my old mixed CDs, but it reminded me of this odd thing, which was there was a girl when I was a teenager who received more than one mixtape from me over the years. And, fast forward years and years later, and this I know this from other people I gave tapes to, they all saved my tapes. And so she contacted me.
If you have always been loved.
Well, I don't know. They loved my mixtapes. She contacted me and said, I've got these old mixtapes that you made for me way back when. And I had, at the time, I probably made these in the 1983, 85, 86, those years. And she was this was like 2010, 2015, something like that. And so 30 years later, she still had them, and she offered to send them back to me. I was like, oh, sure, yeah, I'd love to have them. I can't remember the artwork. I didn't, you couldn't make copies of it. Right. You could make a photocopy, but I'd clipped it all out and, glue sticked it and was lining it all up. Like I was a real perfectionist. And, but then I got them and I was like, huh, like they're cool. I was really excited. I was happy to have them, but also I was like, oh, she gave them back.
Yeah.
Like getting back to letters in the Victorian era.
Yeah.
Like the end of something.
Yeah, indeed. So
I'd like to shift this a little bit out of nostalgia mode for a minute and ask you guys, like, things that our generation is creating now, right? Mm-hmm. Like, is there Gen X culture being made by people in their 40s and 50s today? I would make an argument for Severance, for example.
I have not seen. I feel like I am firmly in the target audience for Severance and have not yet watched it. Who's the showrunner on that?
Is Ben Stiller.
It is, okay.
Yeah.
Ask David about him and Ben Stiller and their years together.
You're okay.
They were very important years. So when I was born, my family lived in Manhattan on the Upper West Side, and it has lived on in Selden family lore and probably not in Stiller family lore because my parents were not locally famous comedians, but that we lived down the hall from them. And they had a new baby and we had a new baby. So like their moms would take us to the park together and whatnot. But Ben and I have never reconnected since we moved to the suburbs when I was 2.
You're in there. Yeah. You beat his ass as an infant.
Yeah.
So your years together were literally your first 2 years.
Yes, exactly.
Very memorable.
Severance, so you haven't seen it. I'm curious about that. You had mentioned John Hughes earlier, and I was thinking he's a kind of weird example in our book because I think of him as a boomer through and through. Like he's not a Gen Xer.
He personally, is not one of us, but he told our story.
He told our stories, and I think in a lot of ways told it in a boomerish fashion. But I think a lot of our generation really related to that, connected to it, and we have those memories of seeing those movies and all of that. So it's interesting to think about Ben Stiller now and what a show like Severance, like, is he the John Hughes of the millennials or something like that? Someone of a different generation who's somehow transforming that, or you're saying he's bringing Gen X attitude? I
think the show is very much. I mean, it's not clear when it's set, other than that it's clearly like pre-smartphone, right. Modern era. And it's right. It's all about this, like, how do you define yourself as a person? Is your work what makes you? All of which seem like really live questions for people in our age cohort now. The cast, at least by looks, all look like they're in our generation. Maybe not John Turturro, but most of the people are kind of in our age range. And it just has the feel to me of a document that, I'm talking to academics and I start talking about a TV show as a document, that really does come from and speak to our generation.
Also,
Go ahead.
Oh, I don't want to. You go ahead, Melissa.
I was going to say, when you asked the question, Yellow Jackets came to mind for me. Okay. So we can loop back to that. But Dave, what were you going to say?
Yellow Jackets features our Choose or Lose bus in one of their episodes, which was the thing I did for MTV. So I guess I'm a little bit on Yellow Jackets. just a tiny bit. So this was an interesting debate Dave and I were having off air, which was, is it of Gen X if it was produced by a non-Gen Xer but adopted by us?
Right.
And then the flip side is it of Gen X if it's produced by a Gen Xer outside of our formative years? And it's, I kind of feel like if you adopted it as your own, then it's Gen X. And certainly that's where the John Hughes movies go. I'm intrigued by your boomer themes comment, Kevin, about John Hughes as well.
I think it's a kind of conservative suburban Americana kind of thing. I would argue most narrative is ultimately conservative, and everything gets wrapped up nice and tidy. But the movies are very safe and not dangerous, and which is part of the pleasure. That's not to take anything away from the craft of how they're put together, but there's kind of conservativeness to them that doesn't have that bite.
Yeah. If any of you tracked this Ducky debate from 16 Candles that existed in recent years.
Ducky was pretty in pink, wasn't he?
Pretty in pink, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know about this?
Is it like the argument for Ducky, like that?
Like she should have chosen Ducky?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's no argument. She should have chosen Ducky.
She should have, but there's also a counter argument, which is that she shouldn't have chosen either of them because Ducky was like too possessive and he wasn't all that great either about her. It's fascinating to hear this debate like rekindle decades later.
Yeah.
I teach a class this coming fall at the University of Oklahoma, like a class on Gen X, which is hilarious. I'll be there for a week. I think that I've gotten multiple like parent emails already. I'm like, this is the parents wanting me to explain us to their children. And I've never been so excited to go like basically mansplain Gen X to a bunch of other people's children. As a child-free person, this is my dream. And I first of all, I've been doing like endless math on like, what would I need to assign making mixtapes to these kids? Like what's my budget? Where do I go to buy a boombox in 2025? Like, I have so many questions about that.
With a dual cassette, so you can dub.
Right? Yeah, you have to have a dual cassette. I need 25 of them, because that's how many students, it's a mess already. But that, I was thinking about talking about these.
There's lots of federal funding available for that kind of thing, though. So
yes, none of it's gone at all right now. It all definitely still exists.
Ouch.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
I was thinking about talking about like the Ducky question, like that could be a unit, capital T D Q, the Ducky question. Like,
I'm gonna add in Troy in Reality Bites. This debate gets reignited. I see online even now. People are like, I just watched Reality Bites for the first time. That guy's an asshole. What the?
He's a fucking sociopath. Like, we absolutely broke an entire generation of straight women. Like, ruined my 20s.
I watched it and I was like, he's the cool dude. And I did. And yes, fast forward, grow up, any maturity. I'm like, this is atrocious behavior top to bottom. I can't believe.
Yeah. He was, but yeah. And then the Stiller character ends up actually being a good guy, right? I mean, like, we should let you guys go soon. I did want to come back to one comment you made about the John Hughes safety thing, and it struck me. You mentioned class in passing earlier, and we haven't really talked about it yet. But like, those movies really, what they're showing is not like typical American teenagerdom, right? They're showing upper middle class suburban teenagerdom, which is like an extremely safe environment, and it is this world where you get to fuck up in all kinds of ways and do all kinds of dangerous and stupid things and not face consequences.
On Saturday and it'll be fine. Yeah.
Isn't she super poor in Pretty in Pink though?
Pretty in Pink's and Harry Dean Stanton, I think, plays her father. There's the theme of the single parent, and he's
the alcoholic.
So he's like not really there. But I think the point though is that those characters are still in a safe world that we know they're going to be okay. There's not real.
It still manages to be aspirational. Like, it's odd in it, like its portrayal of like difficult poverty is
Yeah.
interesting.
She's able to make the dress into something better than it was, and
she ruins the dress. We can have that argument. We can talk about that after the Ducky argument. But
We're probably the wrong people to have that conversation with. But yeah.
You know, this reminds me, and I know we've been on for a bit, but you guys are so great. David, permit me to extend with one more deep question, if that's okay. So we haven't talked about divorce and latchkey kids. Those are, you know, obviously not everyone had divorced parents, and not everyone was a latchkey kid, but there were elements of that we all were around. I remember a classmate of mine whose parents were divorced, and I regarded him as a bit of an alien, and like, wow, why is he so normal? His parents are divorced, and you know, that kind of stuff. I'm curious whether you think the differentness of that experience of our generation, do you think that changed the culture that we experienced? Or, sorry, changed the culture that we responded to, rather.
I would say absolutely. And children of divorce and latchkey, I think it's in some ways we can kind of put those together, although there's two completely different kind of groups. My parents weren't divorced, but they both worked certain hours where I'd get off the bus and I'd go home, and I think the bigger thing is connecting both of those is just how free range we were.
Exactly.
And so like the story of like, be home when the streetlights come on. And that's like, they tell you that at 10 a.m. You know, you get on your dirt bike and you go play at the abandoned house, and you go and you go over
construction site.
You have lunch at someone else's house. You don't know, hey, Tom's mom, can I get some juice? And so that kind of freedom and permissive, like, it's wild now, the kind of norms of parenting today. Just how much freedom we had, and I guess that was a product of latchkey and or single parents. Certainly also a product of more women entering the workforce, and kind of changing family structures and the nuclear family and so on. A lot of unstructured TV time. I'd come home, get the snack, and it would be, I had the shows memorized. What was
Speed Racer.
Wheel of Fortune came on. I was like, all right, time to do the homework, because then we're going to do Jeopardy, and then it's going to be dinner, and then I can go out. And what do you think though about that?
Yes, I like, just in terms of, we were culturally omnivorous out of sheer lack of attention. Like, we didn't have cable, so I wasn't consuming as much amazingness. Although, like, the weird off channel that would show just like wild ass movies, like wholesale. I don't know, in rural Ohio, it was Channel 43, and they would just show some like wild shit. That's definitely where I saw like Clash of the Titans and all of like the Harryhausen movies and stuff like that for the first time. I was just like mind blown. But just could, like ride my bike. The bike lanes didn't exist. It was definitely not safe.
If you could get a ride to the mall, then you got 4 or 5 hours there walking around.
Abandoned at the mall for an entire day. Like, just like, again, like things that you would not do with children now.
I hitchhiked home so often with strange adults in the mall parking lot. Yes, absolutely.
Like, there was no public transportation, so it was like, so-and-so's dad drove me home. Who's that? I don't know. He's a grade ahead of me. Like, just like absolutely unfettered, which is so fascinating for me, because my parents were so strict, but they also left me to my own devices the majority of every day.
So then, of course, then it was these Gen X latchkey kids who had all this freedom, who grew up to be the helicopter parents. Like, what's up with that?
We all got convinced by the milk cartons that kids were being snatched up left and right.
True.
It's true, yeah.
It is. I get really mad whenever anybody mentions the Dungeons and Dragons movie, Honor of
the new one?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great movie. But my mom loves it, and it infuriates me because my mom believed so passionately in the Satanic Panic, and my older brother and I like got dragged to talk to the priest for showing a passing interest in Dungeons and Dragons, and that we were going to become witches and sacrifice babies in the woods. So when she was like, "Did you see that movie? It's so cute." I like spent 4 therapy sessions like unpacking how enraged I was because the fear of the milk carton panic, the people sacrificing babies in the woods. Do you consider yourself a helicopter parent?
Oh no, the exact opposite.
I'm just curious.
No. I live in Brooklyn, so helicopter parenting has the intensity to it here that you don't see in many places. No, the exact opposite. I rejected that. I think, and I know we're going to finish up, but to also build off on your story, I'm sure the lesson you learned from your mom dragging you to the priest was, I'm going to keep my mouth shut and hide everything.
100%.
And not share this, right? So that
my mom doesn't know I'm in New York right now. I don't tell her shit about my life because of that specific moment in time where I was like, you weaponize all information.
So
this is what you do.
A lot of this underground things is like, we're just going to do it. We don't need to ask. We're not going to ask, and I'm not going to volunteer.
Lesson learned.
How was your day? It's fine. Just keep moving it.
That is outstanding.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you guys have been an absolute pleasure. I feel like we need to have you back for other topics in the future. But in the meantime, Melissa, Kevin, we're excited to see your book. I want a road trip to Norman and peek in on this class. And I have more devious ideas for that. So
yes, I'll email you. I want all of the ideas.
And tell us briefly about the book, like when is it coming out? I know it's not necessarily aimed at a mass audience. Our audience are the kind of people who would be interested in such a thing. So plug away.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, it'll be out in mid-November of this year from Bloomsbury. I'm happy to think of it as the book that I'm going to write that my mom can read and enjoy. So I do think it has like a potential wider audience. Basically, if you're interested in hearing our two very, very specific takes on Gen X, that's what this book will be.
You can also ask your library to purchase a
Yes,
copy.
Ask your library. Because it's coming from an academic press. So
it's going to be a little expensive.
Don't pay for this book. Get your library to buy this book.
Yeah.
All right. I'll get on
If you know a professor, get them to teach this book. That's that's the ideal.
All right.
my dad's a history professor, but I do not trust him on this topic. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you guys so much for making the time. This was a great conversation. We would love to do it again, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Thanks. So we're back. That was a great conversation. I feel like we did get some guidance that might help us going forward. I like the whole apathy and authenticity sort of tension and dialogue in there as something to play with and think about.
Yeah, authenticity as a virtue, I think, is a really interesting concept that does feel like it was really in the DNA of our generation, and not unfamiliar to subsequent generations either, but manifesting in very different ways. You think about how nowadays, like, really produced videos are trusted less than like DIY handheld video, like it's a different version of that.
But it does stem from the same place of this awareness. And I feel like it was drilled into our heads when we were kids that, like, you're being manipulated, you're being lied to, and so there's this awareness that's happening, and nobody wants to be manipulated and lied to, for the most part. And, so you're hyper vigilant about it in different ways. And that's why kids are getting measles now. But anyway,
we might be dead of measles by the time this thing airs.
Not me. I'm impervious. I'm Gen X, man.
Yeah. Is it time for our wormholes?
It is, I believe, time for our wormholes. I feel like we should explain what the wormhole segment is probably every time we do it, because it's not intuitive.
You go for it.
So I was hoping you were going to, but Wormholes is our little wrap-up thing here at the end, where we simply, pick out something that we learned in our digging around of the internet and whatnot over the past week, because that's what middle-aged dads like us do, and our families won't listen to us tell them anymore, so we're making all of you people hear what we have to say.
All right, David, that's, as always, a far savvier and erudite explanation than I ever could have come up with. And also, by the way, before I forget, I need to compliment you on the shirt. You always you make a lot of self-deprecating comments about fashion, but I like that shirt.
This is my favorite shirt that I own.
It's a good-looking shirt. Nicely done. All right.
And all right. Now, but we're going to cut that out of the show.
No. I'm leaving that in. We're leaving it.
All right.
So what's your wormhole for the week?
So my wormhole for the week is a news story that I read in the Washington Post, actually, which I hate to admit to somehow, but it was all about swear words, Dave. It was about naughty language and various scientific studies. Did you see this?
I did. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Showing that basically just swearing out loud or even in your internal dialogue has a meaningful, measurable response in pain tolerance and in physical strength. It's fascinating, and it comes with, like, my whole thing about profanity, that I don't swear a lot generally, is not because I object to it, because I think, like, you want to hold it in reserve for when you need it. And it sort of ratifies that, because it said, like, the theory anyway is that the power of the words comes from the sense that you're being naughty, that you're being transgressive, you're doing something wrong, and that somehow is empowering and strengthening. And so if you're one of these people who walks around saying fuck all the time, then it doesn't do anything for you when you need it. But if you hold it in abeyance, it could save your life.
That's awesome. And do you, they didn't do any research on the impact that swearing has on the people who hear you utter it, did they?
They didn't. I will say it's funny, like the example it gave in the lead of the story was about stubbing your toe, which is one of the first time I ever heard my daughter heard either of my children swear, was she was probably like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old, maybe a little bit older. And she stubbed her toe and she yelled shit, which at first I was horrified, right? My sweet little girl. And then it's like, well, that seems like kind of the right reaction. I don't know. I think that's an appropriate use of that kind of language.
Wow, that's interesting. I do recall the first time I swore in front of my kids, and it caused tears. So they were a little traumatized, and I was too. Hence my original question on impact on others. So, but that's great. Okay. So, by the way, do you think, I don't know if you would agree with this, but after having worked in DC, I came to realize that I had never sworn more in a work setting than I did in Washington. Did you feel that when we were there?
No, I don't think so. There were people in that environment who swore a lot.
I did work for Jeff Eller, so yeah, that might be it.
But no, I don't remember that as a thing. And it's certainly, I've never worked, thankfully, in the finance industry, but I've worked adjacent to it. And those people, swear constantly. And I worked with a lot of British people for a long time. And, that's the only way they know how to communicate, it seems like sometimes. But,
but they make it sound so much prettier.
Yeah. So what is your wormhole this week, Dave? And can you express it in a haiku?
I did not pass my haiku lesson in grade school, so no, cannot do that. But I do have one, and it's a fun one. Have you ever heard of Errol Morris's Interrotron?
No.
Okay, so I'm guessing you do know who Errol Morris is, the famed
filmmaker, yeah,
documentary filmmaker. An innovator, also a very quirky filmmaker, early films like The Gates of Heaven about a pet cemetery from the 70s, and another one about eating Werner Herzog's shoe, but he got more world famous for films like The Fog of War, and more recently he had one on John le Carré, which was really interesting, a biography doc about him. And interestingly enough, according to my search, he has a documentary coming out on Netflix in a matter of days on your boy Charles Manson. with new Charles Manson
I'm not sure that I'm
stuff.
comfortable with that phrasing, by the way.
It's interesting. At least the trailer makes it look like he's got genuinely new dope about Manson himself. So, and the CIA. So who knows if that's true or not, but I do love Errol Morris. And I read about him when
I just want to go on the record that Charles Manson is not my boy necessarily in any way. I just referenced him on a previous wormhole situation.
I won't tell anybody.
Just in case law enforcement is listening.
Okay, so Errol Morris invented this thing called the Interrotron, and this is a bit of like movie television production nerddom that people might not care about, but I love it. So anyone who's ever been interviewed by a local reporter, for example, knows that the reporter can't stand in front of the camera because they block the camera. So they stand to the side and they do the interview. And then the effect for the viewer of that interview is that whoever's being interviewed is looking not into the camera, but off camera. And that's the natural thing because they're making eye contact with the person asking them questions. Errol Morris, from the earliest days of his documentary career, was obsessed with trying to get his interviewees to look directly into the camera so that the viewer of the content would feel a more personal connection, because when a subject's looking off camera, it's less personal. And so evidently in his early days, he would, like on Gates of Heaven, he would just start moving his head up against the lens to the point where some of his hair would flop into the picture, and then the camera would grab his head and throw it to the side. Like, he was really into this. And he finally came up with an innovation that was brilliant, and which I, years later, when I read about it in the early 90s, copied it for something we did at the White House, which was he took a teleprompter, which most people think of as the thing that newscasters look into, and it has words on it. Well, those words are coming from, some kind of digital source that then projects them up onto the screen. Well, you can put something else into that thing. And so what he did was he would sit in another room with a microphone on himself, a camera on himself. He'd run the audio and video into the room where his subject was, so they actually weren't in the same place. He'd run the video of himself into the screen
through the teleprompter.
So in order to see him, they had to look directly into the camera, and then they'd start responding directly to him. Hence the Interrotron, which is a term his wife coined, and he's used that.
That's cool.
It's a brilliant invention. It works well. I've done it on a few occasions. I love it. And again, this will air later, but we're right now in Oscar week, and it reminded me of an open to the Oscars that Errol Morris did in 2002, where it's a bunch of famous actor types and others, including Laura Bush and Donald Trump, of all people, talking about their love of film. And it's one of my all-time favorite short films, and it's on YouTube, and I'll put a link somewhere. I might even embed it into our video. And it's everyone on it is using his Interrotron.
It'll go into the show notes.
Yes.
There you go. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the stirring conclusion of Stupid Gen X Tricks, episode 5. Coming up next, another really cool guest, Daniel Radosh, longtime Daily Show writer, and I think head writer at some point, also Spy Magazine alumnus, which endears him to me without ever having met him. And excited about this one. We'll be talking about Game Changers and other things. So tune in 2 weeks from whenever you tuned into this.
All right. Well, subscribe, skywrite, and share on social media. We appreciate everyone's support and feedback.
Thanks very much.
Good night and good luck.